Hello and welcome to the Lord of the Rings, the living card game. I'm the White Tower Watchman. Folks, I have good news today. A mystery's been solved. So, in a prior video I made, I discussed that I was investigating this mystery of whether enemies get more than one framework attack per round if they so happen to change their engagement, re-engage the next player or a subsequent player in that combat phase. I have the answer. The answer, if you just want the short version, I'll just give you the answer now. If you want to watch the rest of the video, we can discuss everything. But the answer is enemies are not limited to one framework attack per round. They are not limited. They can make as many framework attacks as, well, I guess they can make up to 4 framework attacks if there's 4 players in the game and they happen to each do something dumb like sneak attack a Son of Arnor right before their enemy attack step. I don't know why you do that. I'm just saying theoretically. So basically, I had asked a rules question about this, and I got an answer pretty quick, and it is what it is. Here's the answer. Enemies are not limited in the number of attacks they can make. So if an enemy attacks the first player and subsequently engages the second player before that player resolves their enemy attack step, that enemy will attack again. So it's really cut and dry. I was having problems with the FFG rules question system there. It kept giving me errors. Otherwise, I could have got this. It was so easy to get an answer. I feel like I could have got this answer months ago. It's just that I don't know, it might have been my browser, but I thought I was getting like paranoid, and I thought like, oh, there's nobody answering questions anymore. So I just kind of gave up. But it might have just been my browser. I kept getting errors. But yeah, it really is that cut and dry. So in my prior video, I discussed the shadow card Northern Warg. This is when it's going to come up the most. So we're in the first player's enemy attack step. Wolf of Angmar attacks. We'll just say we defend with Aragorn, and we get a shadow card. It is Northern Warg. After this attack, attacking enemy engages the next player, then makes an immediate attack, deal a new shadow card for that attack. And here's where it gets interesting. So, that attack's over, whatever happens, happens. If it's Knight, he's going to take some damage. If it's not, it's going to be 2-2. So now this shadow effect triggers after that attack. Even if you have more enemies out here, this happens due to the shadow effect. He comes over here, engages this player. You deal another shadow card because it's an immediate attack, and you discard the prior shadow cards before dealing this shadow card. Understand that when an immediate or an additional attack happens from a card effect, that attack always gets a shadow card, even if it's inside the combat phase, any phase. Okay, the FAQ says if it's outside the combat phase, but that's just, they're not, it's not to be taken 100% literally. That FAQ is just stating that in general it will happen outside the combat phase, but in a rare circumstance like this, it could happen in the combat phase. So then he's going to go ahead and do an immediate attack. We'll defend with Baragon for 4, and he's going to take 1 damage from the Biting Wind. Boom. Now after this attack's over, this shadow card is discarded immediately because it's not a framework attack. It's an additional attack from a card effect. Okay? So, then we would resolve any other attacks we had out here because we're still in the first player's resolve attack step. So assuming they have no other enemies, we come over here. And now the second player, they go through all their framework steps. And they're going to take a framework attack without a shadow card from this enemy right here. They're going to take another attack, a third attack, if you will. So that is how that would play out. This is the way I assumed the game was for most of my time playing the game. It's the way I assumed everyone played the game. But a weird chain of events created a bunch of, what do you call it, very coincidental misunderstandings. So essentially, there was this FAQ that showed up. So when an enemy that's already made an attack engages a new player during the combat phase, does it make another attack? This is not unless it's directed to by card effect. It's strange to me because this kind of grew into a huge idea that made everyone believe that there was every enemy is only limited to one framework attack. We know that's not true of things like Durin's Bane and enemies that are in the staging area engage with multiple players because they by definition make multiple framework attacks. But then an answer that we got about another question long story short, it made it sound like that those kind of enemies were an exception, and normal enemies still only get one framework attack. That's just the way the answer was. It's hard to explain, but the answer was answering another question, and then through the way it was worded, people assumed all this other stuff. It doesn't matter. The point is, all enemies are not limited to one framework attack, whether it's Durin's Bane type of enemy or normal enemy. Now, the reason this FAQ exists is because I think the answer, this is kind of wild, but the answer assumed that the question asker, was saying, does it make another attack right then and there? Like, is the attack part of that engagement effect? It's like, no, but it is still going to make a framework attack when that next player's framework attack step comes up, you know. So I suppose if an enemy was engaged with the fourth player, the last player, or the last player doesn't have to be the fourth player, but the last player, no matter how many players are in the game, it makes framework attack and gets re-engaged with the first player, it would not make another framework attack because the first player has already done their attack. So if it engages a preceding player, it's not going to do a framework attack. If it engages a subsequent player, it will in that player's enemy attack step. Okay, if that makes sense. So that's how this would play out. Attacks here, bounces over here, makes an additional attack, that gets a shadow card, and then gets, when it's the second player's turn to do their framework attacks, it's going to do a framework attack without a shadow card because the framework attack shadow step happens at the beginning of combat. This is not an additional attack. You have to think of it as this is the normal attack that player would have got from that enemy when the step to resolve enemy attacks comes up. That is not an additional or immediate attack, so it doesn't get a shadow card there. That's how that all would play out. So the questions has been answered. We have a consensus, and I can move on to the next mystery, which is probably going to be the Doom debacle. We'll talk more about that later in another video. But yeah, so the other thing that people, basically in conjunction with this FAQ, people were looking at the combat phase framework steps, and it says resolve enemy attacks process begins, okay? And then you go to the next enemy attack. It says the active player chooses an eligible enemy that they are engaged with to resolve its attack. An eligible enemy is one that has not yet attacked this round and is still able to attack. People were taking that literally, like an eligible enemy is one that has not yet attacked this round. What a rulebook tends to do is give you kind of like the basic framework, but it doesn't delve into every single possible scenario. So what it's saying is, in the same way that the shadow card rule in the FAQ says, if an enemy makes an additional attack outside the combat phase, it always gets a shadow card. But it doesn't say inside the combat phase. Yeah, it's just saying that normally it happens outside of the normal combat framework, right? But if it were to, in a rare circumstance, like the Northern Warg Shadow effect, happen inside the combat phase, it would also get a shadow card for an additional or immediate attack induced by a card effect. Okay, and then this here is not to be taken literally, where an eligible enemy is one that has not yet attacked this round, because you don't lose an enemy doesn't lose its framework attack if it's made an attack at any point this round. Otherwise, things like Haradrim Elite, when it enters play, makes immediate attack from staging against the first player, or Crazy Cobb, when revealed, enemy attacks character with the most poison. So that's like in its limbo before it even gets in the staging area. Now, if they do their little card effect attacks there, they've attacked that round, but they don't lose their framework attack later in the combat phase when they become engaged with someone. So if they become engaged with someone. So you can't take, you already know we can't take that statement completely 100% literally. That's just the rule book giving you a general overview. And sometimes terminology it glosses over that because you can't write a rule book and do every single scenario of every single card interaction for every single step. So but between that and then the FAQ here, which is just a misunderstanding of the question and answer, and then another answer we got about Durin's Bane type of enemies, basically the designer said, I'm paraphrasing, but Durin's Bane type of enemies attack each player in order. In that regard, we'll have to update the rules reference, basically update this stuff, right? People thought that in that regard meant only for Durin's Bane type enemies, but the in that regard meant in general, we have to update the rules here. So it's good to know now that enemies are not limited to one framework attack, no matter if it's a Durance Bane type enemy or any normal enemy. As always, it's always harder for you in Lord of the Rings Living Card Game. So Waste of Eriador just got a little harder. If you got an enemy, let's go over it one more time. If you got an enemy, you're the first player, you get Northern Warg. It attacks you, boom. This induces a additional attack. It comes over here, discard the shadow card, deal another shadow card, attacks this player. Discard the shadow card immediately because it was an additional attack. If it was a framework attack, it would stay on there until either the enemy dies or enemy's destroyed or the end of the combat phase. And then we come to the second player, next player does another framework attack, but without a shadow card. Because it's not an additional or immediate attack, it's the normal attack that would have happened if that enemy is engaged with that player during its framework step of resolving enemy attacks. Okay, so I'll probably make another whole video of like a refresher course on how the whole shadow cards thing works, but this video is just to clarify that the mystery solved and all enemies can get any number of framework attacks. Well, I suppose 4, right? Because there's 4, it could be up to 4 players in a game. So, yeah, good to know. Thanks for watching. See you next time.